All right, Ramblers, let's ramble. We have a special guest today. We have Dr. Jamie Seabrook, who happens to be, I call him a friend as well. I hope he calls me a friend as well. We've known each other probably for about 4 or 5 years now. Started in the soccer world, but the reason why we're talking today is the good doctor is a biostatistician. He's also an epidemiologist. You've been doing a ton of stuff. You've been on CNN, a whole bunch of other places. So first of all, how are you doing? How's your health? Is everything going well with you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Big transition over from Brescia University College to Western University, but that was effective May 1st, and excited about my new location.
I'm not happy with calling it Western University, by the way. I don't know if you're okay with that. To me, it's still UWO. To my friends, it's still UWO, and it'll always be UWO.
That's still the legal name, but it is what it is.
Is it? I didn't know that actually.
Yeah.
So today, what I want to talk to you about specifically, something you've been doing some research on, is vaping. It's everywhere. You see it everywhere. When I'm on campus, it is absolutely everywhere. Just as far as popularity and how prevalent it is it going up? Is it going down? Is it the same? Is it worse than cigarettes? What are we looking at?
So in 2023, myself and one of my former grad students, who also happens to be a black belt at my martial arts program, him and I published a study in Children that used data from the 2019 Canadian-wide data. And interestingly, in 2019, we found that 26% of Canadian high school students across the nation were vaping in the past month. So that's one of four. And interestingly, what we found was that often research treats vape use as if it's some unitary behavior, but in reality, there's different types of vape users. So the vast majority use their vape products to consume nicotine. A much smaller percent will use nicotine-free vapes. And then there's some that will use some combination of nicotine or nicotine-free. And then about 1/3 of adolescents in Canada use their vape products to consume cannabis.
Right.
And what we found, Dean, in our research was that exclusive nicotine use tended to increase for every subsequent year in high school. So, for example, if you're in grade 9, you're more likely to start off with maybe nicotine-free products, but by the time you reach grade 10 and then certainly into grade 11, the odds of nicotine exclusive use went up a lot.
So the idea of it not having nicotine in it, like that's just for flavoring?
Yeah, a lot of it is flavoring and experimentation, and
Okay.
they're doing it. But anyway, that was 2019 data, even though it was published in 2023. Although that was nationally representative data of Canada, I did a small scale study of Western students that was published in 2021 based on survey data from 2020, so like a year later. And what we found was in university students at Western in London, Ontario, vape use was way higher. So, which, about 40% had said that they had ever vaped, and about 20% had vaped in the past month. And then when we look at more of the more recent data here from 2022, nationwide stats 30% of Canadian youth aged 15 to 19 have reported ever trying vapes. 14%, so it has gone down, reported past month vaping behavior, and close to 7% said they vape every single day of the month.
Jeez. Is there enough are there enough long-term studies or long enough studies that we can make a determination that this is something that is serious, it has serious health risks? Have we gotten there yet?
Well, we don't have a lot of longitudinal research to show the long-term health impacts, unfortunately. The vast majority of the data has been very cross-sectional, a lot of survey research on like correlates or predictors of vape use. But what we do know, at least in terms of the acute phase, is that among adolescents who vape, they have much higher odds of nicotine toxicity, a higher odds of acute pulmonary injury, of course, lower sleep patterns. Another one, of course, that we're worried about is the brain development, because, of course, age 25-ish and above, you got the adult brain versus the developing brain. And it's not that, when people talk about the developing brain, is that vape use doesn't tend to occur by itself. It's often a gateway, if you would, towards other polysubstance use, especially cannabis. And I guess the other really major concerning thing, Dean, is that these were put in place initially, vapes, to help adults quit smoking. But of course, what we're having is the popularity is highest among non-smoking youth. And meta-analyses show that you're about 5 times more likely to initiate cigarette smoking after you get addicted to these vapes. So it's having the opposite effect.
Yeah, I remember some of those early ads, some of the early commercials. It was like, help help us use our product and we will help you get off of this horrible substance, right? This killer. And
Yeah.
now we may find out that it's just as bad. It's just as much of a killer. Is it possible that we will find out later, years down the road, that this is as bad, if not worse?
Well, I'll say this, that e-cigarettes have overall less harmful chemicals than combustible cigarettes, but they have equivalent, sometimes higher nicotine content. So the big issue is that adolescents are getting so addicted to this nicotine, and of course, by definition, that increases the odds that they'll turn to cigarette smoking, and that they'll need more and more nicotine, or they will, more likely to try other substances. And this polysubstance use is really skyrocketing among this group of adolescents.
Is there an underground market for using that tool, but putting fentanyl and other things in it right now, or are we not gotten there yet?
I know less about fentanyl, but I do know that, a big concern about the T using it for THC, for cannabis, is the THC content has skyrocketed. In fact, in the 1980s, the potency of THC was about 3%. And now Health Canada says it's about 15%. So it's gone up about 400%. But, I've talked to a lot of adolescents and doing this research, and they're like 15%. We're always, dealing with THC at about 25 or higher percent. You see, yeah, it's very easy to get. So again, the issue there, Dean, with using vape products for cannabis is there's research showing that that frequent use of cannabis with high potency THC is linked to things like paranoia, a psychosis,
Schizophrenia?
schizophrenia. There's a correlation there for sure, and something that's we've talked about for a while, and healthcare providers maybe don't know enough about it yet. It's called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, and essentially what it is these youth are getting so addicted to this cannabis that they need it all the time. And if they don't, they get these repeated bouts of severe vomiting, even to the point where a temporary relief, besides using cannabis, is they have to take extremely hot showers to give them a little bit of relief. And there's even some research, although preliminary, saying that this cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome is being linked to eating disorders, meaning that it's scary. They feel like they can't eat a good meal unless they've got this cannabis kick in them. So eating disorders and vomiting is a major problem. And this is another area of research that is now in the exploration phase.
Wow, it's gone from something that was supposed to help people get off of cigarettes to something that could be perceived as an epidemic at some point. who gets to in Canada and the United States, who approves the sale of these and the technology?
Yeah, so what we know is that there's six provinces, territories right now that have, and this is probably a good thing, banned flavored vapes, which presumably will help reduce vape use, right? Because a huge part of this marketing, I hate to say it, but
Yeah.
aggressive marketing strategy was targeting youth with these flavored vape products, whether it's dessert flavor, whether it's a candy flavor. They even have, margarita flavor, basically whatever you want. I'm hoping that the removal of those flavored vape products will reduce the vape use. However, there's two sides to the argument. I'm very my research is geared towards youth. Those who are adults who are trying to quit cigarette smoking, they won't like this
Right.
prohibiting flavored vape products because they want to use it to reduce or perhaps quit their cigarette smoking. So it's a very challenging dilemma right now.
Yeah, and even if you take the libertarian view, right? Let me kill my like let me do what I want with my body, let me do drugs, let me do alcohol, let me do gambling. But it's like, yeah, but you actually don't know. You're not informed as to what's in it. You're not informed as to the technology and how it works.
Yeah.
So you can't even make an informed decision. So I understand the libertarian view, but could you like maybe just briefly for like, I mean, I still kind of don't understand how the actual technology works other than something's being heated up, which kind of scares me. At a basic level, what is actually going on when I vape and those little droplets of vape, if that is
The
actually
easiest
accurate,
way to explain
happen?
it is like I've heard some people say the word smoke. You don't smoke vape, you inhale the vape. So and any air that's not normal air is not good. So even nicotine-free vapes are of course better for you than nicotine vapes, but they're still not good for you. So what you're doing is you're inhaling this, and these harmful chemicals are affecting the lung. And, for those that are, very addicted that, vape it, for example, all the time or every single day, we're seeing a lot of like things like popcorn lung.
Oh
And
my God.
yeah, it's
That
not
is
good.
ugly, right?
It's ugly. And some, I was at a Canadian Institutes of Health Research, CIHR, end of grant workshop, and they were saying that don't quote me on the year, it might have been 2030, but the goal was to, get cigarette smoking down to this level, which is a good thing in Canada. And I had actually raised my hand. I said, what about vape? Well, it's something we're working towards, but so I mean, this is a good thing for cigarette smoking, but it's not a good thing for adolescent vape use. And when people go, well, hold on, more recent trends show a reduction in vape use. Yeah, a couple of years were during the pandemic when a lot
Right.
of the shops were closed down. And, Dean, as you know, vape shops used to be everywhere, and now we're seeing cannabis
Yes.
stores
Yeah.
everywhere. You
Yeah.
just basically every corner. So it's not like one is going down and then everything else in terms of polysubstance use is going down.
Yeah. A lot of the vapors may have switched to edibles as well.
For
And the
sure.
problem with those is you take 20 milligrams now, a month from now, you're gonna need 40.
Right.
And then literally, like I know people that are up to 1,000 milligrams in an edible,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
And
Um,
that and speaking of which, like when people like sometimes I've done, I don't know, CBC interviews or CTV, and I'll get the question, so what's your view on cannabis legalization? It's
yeah.
a completely different issue
Yes.
because adult brain, developing brain, I'm dealing with developing brain. I even do research on, people who are pregnant that are using cannabis or smoking cigarettes or consuming a lot of alcohol during pregnancy. That's completely different because that's going to affect baby developing brain. So my focus is very much, I feel like a lot of this was rolled out too quick,
Yeah.
basically is my stance.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed like all of a sudden one day I'm watching TV and there's this ad for something called Blue. and it was really, really cool. And it had a celebrity, Steven Dorff, I think, was in on that, one of those original ones. And they just popped up, and I'm like, have these been studied? I mean, they just
I know.
throw these out. And what you were talking about a little bit earlier, you're talking about the weed inside of the vape. That's a double whammy because, as you know, there's a real fear there of schizophrenia and some of the psychosis issues with, again, under the age of 25, it seems like, right, where it's still
Yeah.
developing. And if you know anyone, and I do know somebody, a friend of the family who does have schizophrenia and who did a lot of weed as a kid, and it is absolutely heartbreaking to watch somebody go through schizophrenia. It is not worth
Yeah.
the weed or vaping benefits.
Yeah, I completely agree. There, where we're at with that is there's not any definitive causal relationship, but similar to you, Dean, I had someone come to me and said, there's no schizophrenia anywhere in our family. I believe that my son got schizophrenia, developed schizophrenia from long-term daily, and when I say daily, basically from when you wake
Yes.
up to when you go to bed,
Mhm.
cannabis use. Is that possible? And my response was, we haven't, there's no research that shows causal relationships, but yeah, there's definitely correlational studies to support that.
Yeah, even I think you'll find even the biggest weed advocates will kind of be a little bit reticent about what you tell your children.
Yeah.
I mean, so you have children. If one of you saw one of your kids vaping, would you just go nuts because
Yeah,
you
I
know
wouldn't
the
be happy.
data?
Yeah, I wouldn't be happy, especially with all the research I do on it.
Exactly.
The other thing, Dean, totally forgot to mention, and it's good for the viewers to hear this, is that a lot of people don't know this, but Canada has one of the highest teen vaping and cannabis rates in the entire globe.
I believe that about. I didn't know that about the vaping, the weed. I mean, listen, we were one of the first ones to decriminalize it,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And I always thought my theory was, why isn't the government selling it like they do with booze and like they control gambling? And my theory was because they didn't know what the long-term implications were and they didn't want to be sued. So this way they could just basically have plausible deniability and say, hey, you know what? We're just kind of regulating it, but we're not selling it. But the idea that are there any governments that you see that are getting really strict and really serious about vaping, or is it all kind of just wishy-washy?
Australia.
Australia.
Australia is probably the most strict that I know. They're trying to really, really, really limit any vape use at all. I can't remember where they're at with their most recent policies, but they are definitely on the most extreme end.
And then what you'll see then is people going back to weed then, right? And
Yeah.
more cigarettes.
That's right. That's it. And the other thing I was going to mention too, Dean, is that when we look at cannabis use, although most of my research has been more geared towards vaping, 2023, so just last year, 29% of Canadians, 16 to 19 rather, had used cannabis in the past month, and 9% every single day. So again, about
9%.
one of 10
One of 10.
of teens, higher end teens, 16 to 19, are using cannabis, every single day, and going to school, and
Yeah.
you can see the problem.
Total, yeah. So just a total normal life, but instead of, taking a swig of water every few minutes, you're basically hiding it. They're taking a puff every once in a while. That's the other thing too, is you can hide it
Yeah,
and take
for
a puff whenever you want.
sure. 100%. One of my students, who's 19 now, he's graduated from high school, but he heard me on the radio, and he said, Mr. Seabrook, when we go to the restroom in high school, all of the walls are sticky and everybody goes there to vape. The teachers are aware of it, but they try to
Yeah.
stop it, but they just can't. And it's really, really problematic.
Yeah. In the old days, they'd have to go to the smoke pit. And now that
Right. Right.
So what about secondhand vaping? Is that an issue, or are we not even there yet?
Yes,
Because
it's
I'll tell you, when people are doing it around me, it's not even a health issue. I just hate it so much because of the smell.
yeah.
Because usually it has like a cherry smell or something if they're flavored, and I find it to be so disgusting. But there's this attitude that's like, what? I'm not smoking. There's nothing wrong. Like, what's your problem? Lighten up. And I'm not going to lighten up because I find it to be vile and disgusting.
Yeah, the research in that area, Dean, is relatively new, but it is showing. I haven't done research on secondhand vape, but it is showing also, unhealthy effects for sure. But we don't know enough about certainly any long-term implications of always being around people who vape and getting that secondhand exposure.
Is advertising an issue? Is there any are there any restraints as far as these companies advertising, or can they just put up a poster next to a school if they want in some variety store?
Yeah, so there are no restrictions in Canada of where vape retailers can be located. And we've done some research, and you're not going to be surprised by this, showing that they tend to be clustered close to elementary schools, close to high schools, and even worse, in areas of greater socioeconomic disadvantage. And the problem is that this is an area of research that we're tackling right now, is that until we show, and this is still new in Canada, a strong link between proximity of vape retailers around schools and its association with greater vape use, you know, we need to have that data. We just published a systematic review, our team at Human Environments Analysis Laboratory. We call it HEAL at Western. And our team published a systematic review of 47 studies. Again, the vast majority, though, are in the US. There's not a lot of good Canadian data. So 41 of the 47 studies were from the US. And basically, we found that about 60% of the studies found a clear link between neighborhood advertising, whether that was, billboards, advertising in grocery stores or kiosks or convenience stores, and a higher risk of e-cigarette use. So we showed that relationship. But again, we can't take that and extract that when only 5 of the studies were from Canada. So this is an area that we're trying to tackle.
Yeah, and it's going to take more studying and more people paying attention, which is good though, right? I mean, this is we're kind of at the beginning of this, wouldn't you say?
Very much at the beginning, especially with respect to studies that are looking at long-term health implications.
I remember talking to you a few years ago, and you were doing some work with regard to diet and showing disparities with regard to income
Yeah.
and how people, and which is something that really saddens me, right? Like the healthiest food that you can eat is also the more expensive, right? Whole foods, and then all those super processed foods, like Kraft Dinner, they're
Yeah.
cheap. So when you're telling me here that it tends to be in the lower socioeconomic groups, um, like just one more, it's not like they don't get it bad enough. It's just
Yeah.
one more hit, isn't it?
Yeah. Research shows that the number one determinant of food choice is food price. So it's easy to point fingers at people who are maybe more economically disadvantaged and say, eat this, eat
Yeah.
that, don't eat this, don't eat this. But you're exactly right. When you go to the fresh produce and people middle or higher income even struggle on what they're going to buy, you can imagine being a lower income family of 3, 4, maybe 5 kids perhaps, and trying to justify buying all that healthy foods, even though they should be. The price is just astronomical right now.
It is. I mean, people with wealth are complaining about food prices, let alone people without wealth. Um,
Yeah.
are you finding a difference in province to province with regard to use?
Vape,
Culturally, maybe people out in,
vape
Alberta, let's say, compared to people out east or people in urban areas.
No, we do know though, you brought up an interesting point. It's pretty consistent across Canada, but when you look at geography, polysubstance use tends to be higher in rural areas, particularly alcohol use and cigarette smoking. In fact, we published a study a couple of years ago showing that we looked at 15 to 25-year-olds, so we call that the youth category, and found that in medium and higher level urbanicity, urban areas, there was much higher cigarette smoking among youth. There was much higher alcohol use, but not for cannabis. Cannabis was tend to be more clustered in more medium urban areas. And that was actually an interesting study, which brings up the whole geography issue. We looked actually, Dean, at residential greenness. So there's a lot of research that shows that when people live in areas of high green space, a lot of parks, a lot of trees, etc., mental health is better. And mental health is better and pollution levels are down. And living in an area with much higher green space has also shows a lower substance use. So when people live in areas of more green space, they're less likely to smoke cigarettes.
Mhm.
They're less likely to overdo the alcohol consumption, except for, this was interesting, cannabis. We found the opposite. When there was more green space,
Of course.
maybe, yes, maybe you're not that surprised by
Or
it.
mushrooms.
Right, right, right. And then
um,
there's the whole blue space thing. If you live in areas of greater blue space where you're surrounding water. Now, some will say, is that just, high income? But no, it shows that even if you statistically control for income levels or education levels, that relationship persists. Higher levels of blue space, less substance use.
yeah, and there's so many variables too, right? I mean, you look at wealth. That doesn't tell you everything because it could be that the poor family maybe didn't have a mother and a father. So the wealthy family may have both parents and they're involved in their children's lives and they're having open conversations with them about their health. Whereas poor families may just be concerned about putting food on the table and just working. So there's no one there's no one variable. They're all confounding kind of like is that
Yeah,
is
they're
that the
all
difficulty?
interrelated. Yeah, they're all interrelated. Although I can say, because you're right, Dean, even though we're talking about vape and a little bit of cannabis, all of this is interrelated,
Yeah.
including diet, right? Although this is interesting. In 2019, myself and our team, we published a study looking at diet quality and showed that the top predictor is of having good food skills is team meal preparation. So when you're in the home and you're not waiting for mom or dad to make all the food for you, you're far more likely to have higher food skills when you reach college or university. And that actually translates to better food choices regardless of your income level. So in other words, if myself, Jamie, has higher food skills because I got involved in the kitchen when I was young, when I go off to university, doesn't mean I'm not going to up my pizza intake
Right.
price, but on average, I know how to work within a budget to make healthier choices. And that also translates because we know that on average, this first year to second year of university college, it's about a 7 pound weight difference between
A lot
first
of
and
beer
second.
too.
Right.
Yeah.
But that food skills isn't just something they acquire in when they're living at home as a teen. That goes far beyond into college, university, and even when they start their own families, perhaps.
That's actually something really interesting because think about it. Instead of teaching and preaching, you should eat this. It's good for you. That's bad for you. Instead, if you just teach the skill, how to saute, how to slice, and how to budget for the
Yeah.
food for the week. If you just teach the skill, maybe the rest of it kind of falls into place without the preaching. Because kids, they hate preaching.
100%. So, food meal preparation, things like food safety, when you go to the grocery store, how to do it within a budget. Those skills are so important, but we've lost a lot of that. And you're right, Dean, that is linked because what we find is with greater vape use, with greater cannabis use, with greater alcohol use, cocaine use, diet quality plummets. So that you're right, it's not one thing driving. And that's the other thing I should say too, is when people say to me, Jamie, what should we do about vape use? Well, I would say this, one, ideally do enough to try to prevent the initiation of vape use altogether. However, if the vape use has already started and they're, well into it and are using vapes all the time, I believe that interventions need to occur that target not just vaping cessation, but polysubstance use altogether. Because what we're finding is they're not just doing one
Right.
substance, they're doing many.
Yeah, and you deal with the youngsters, but as you get older, we know that the, the people that do drugs, alcohol, also get involved in gambling,
Yeah.
which destroys more families than people talk about guns. Forget that. Gambling and alcohol destroy more lives in Canada, in the United States, around the world, every single day than any of those other things.
Yeah,
Um,
and Dean, as you know, you make fun of me all the time about it. I'm a diehard Toronto Maple Leafs fan. And as I'm watching the game, there's a reason why I'm saying this. Hey, Canadians, it's not too late to get your bed in, even during the
yes,
third period. Like,
sickening.
it's
It's
sickening.
sickening.
Like,
It's
you,
disgusting. It's half.
yeah,
They spent $500 million. Canadian government spent $500 million 3 or 4 years ago. This was reported in the National Post. $500 million, $500 million to get you to gamble more.
it's unbelievable. And even my wife, like Chantel, like she's not into sports at all, so she'll be on her laptop watching a show and Jamie, are they advertising gambling
Right.
nonstop throughout the
Yes.
3 hour game? You'll get 10 to 15 ads. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. And then at the very end, hey, but if you get addicted, here's a 800 hotline.
Yeah. Gamble
She's
responsibly, please.
like, yeah, right.
Um, well, I mean, look, you were talking about the advertising. They've always been doing that. So you can't advertise alcohol to children. But I don't know if you remember Spuds McKenzie. This was these were ads for Bud, and every commercial had this pit bull in it. And his name was Spuds McKenzie. And he'd be on the beach with a hat and a lei, and he'd be like the party animal. That was the party animal. That wasn't geared towards 40-year-old men or 50-year-old men like us.
No,
It's obvious. It is always obvious who they are targeting,
no doubt. And they deny it,
and they deny it.
but they deny it. But you're absolutely right. And the other really interesting thing I haven't mentioned that I should, now that you're mentioning those kind of, denial versus reality is research has shown that, and this won't surprise you, regardless of where you live and restrictions on age to obtain vapes, they can still get it. They can get it
Yeah.
online. They can ask
Yeah.
their friend to get it. But interestingly, I read one study that compared Canada, the United States, and the UK on underage teens who legally should not be allowed to buy the vapes. And while it was close, Canada was the worst. They were the most likely to still be sold
Wow.
vape products without checking ID,
Sure.
etc. And it's a
They don't
very
think it,
unfortunate.
they just, if people don't think it's a big deal, look, if you go to a cannabis shop, there are limits on the milligrams, right?
Yeah,
But you can just go to Oneida, or you can go online, actually, which is crazy. You can go online and they will deliver it to your house.
right.
And you can get 5,000 milligrams in a package. And I've seen it, 5,000 milligrams in one package. So just it's crazy. And now you're adding in all of these other things, like, so you're adding in the technology that itself is bad for you. So forget the nicotine, forget the weed. You're actually talking about the technology itself. So let's do this now, because I like how you don't make claims without the data, and you're very, very um you're really, really careful when you talk about what the data shows us and what data doesn't show us. What
Yeah.
are you right now comfortable saying to the average college student about vaping and about its harms? What are you comfortable saying?
I'm comfortable saying that it is very bad for your health. It's strongly linked to acute pulmonary injury. It's strongly linked to uh, nicotine toxicity because of, and not to mention the addiction to nicotine. It's strongly linked to shortness of breath. And by the way, Dean, I should also say, and I'll continue on with this. You and I knew each other through soccer. We're also seeing athletes who have brought up in sports and then they start vaping, and all of a sudden they're gassed quick because they get addicted to vaping. It's also linked to poor sleep. It's also linked to improper diet, and it's linked to very much polysubstance use. So these are things that over the long term, data will come out showing its very, very detrimental effects. And if I would just say if youth right now are addicted to it, I'm not going to say stop tomorrow because that's unrealistic for some people, but try to slowly reduce your vape use and do it one step at a time. And there's a lot of resources.
Is it harder to quit because there's more nicotine in it and because they're taking more puffs? Is it actually harder to quit vaping than to quit smoking cigarettes?
It's very close. I mean, it depends on how frequently that they're vaping, but again, for those that are using exclusively nicotine, which is the most prevalent type of vape use among, yeah, it's very difficult because you're addicted to that nicotine. And again, it's linked to higher odds of about 5 times odds of initiating cigarette smoking. So a lot will say, my son, my daughter, they vape a lot, but at least they don't smoke cigarettes. And it's just a scary thing to say because we know statistically you're about 5 times greater odds of turning to that as well as other polysubstance use.
Maybe they just feel helpless as parents, and they're like, we'll take this win
Yeah.
and we'll worry about that one later. But if you're substituting like for like, that's nasty.
Yeah.
It's
You directed me to a Netflix documentary on centenarians
yeah,
and the
live
three,
to 100.
yeah, live to 100. The three take-home message I got, and the reason I'm saying this is it's all linked. Uh, movement. Okay, well, if you get addicted to cannabis and vaping, potentially cigarette smoking, movement will go down, less physical activity because you're less likely to join a soccer team or play basketball. So physical activity goes down. Diet was the number 2 on the documentary. And we know clearly higher polysubstance use, poorer diet. Research is clear about that. And the other is connectedness. And unfortunately, and I think that's so important, of course, but what we try to do is if me, Jamie, is addicted to 5 different substances, who are the people I'm more likely to be associating with? Those doing the same. So my connectedness is that peer influence, that peer pressure, rather than maybe those who are trying to avoid that and focusing on different areas of their life.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading a study. I don't know how good the study was because I just kind of read the bullet points, where it basically said that obese people tend to I mean, they tend to hang around other people that eat poorly, and then everybody just kind of
Yeah,
eats themselves into oblivion.
yeah,
And you mentioned the thing about the diet. I bet you there's some people who used to smoke cigarettes to suppress their appetites. Are they might be using vaping, saying they might be watching this right now saying, hey, great, maybe I'll vape to lose some weight.
yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a clear link to that. I'm careful what I say,
I,
Dean,
I
but
know,
but
I
but
know.
I will tell you this, and it was so unfortunate that we published a study, although it wasn't specific to youth per se, showing that in 2018, pregnant a woman who used cannabis were about 3 times, almost 3 times greater odds of having a low birth weight baby. And the low birth weight baby is less than 2,500 grams, which is under 5.5 pounds. And, it hit the news. And at the time, um, it was the biggest study in Canada to show that relationship between cannabis use during pregnancy and having a low birth weight baby. And,
That would have
many,
been weed probably at the time, like smoking it at that time when you
correct.
did that study, right? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And then one person had commented, I just stay away from the comments, but sometimes they're hard to avoid, saying, "Oh, it's a win-win for me because I get to suppress my appetite during pregnancy and I get a small baby and don't have to worry about having an overweight baby." It's terrible. But I'm saying that sometimes those negative attitudes persist, and what we need is not so much slamming them, but more education. And this is where I really appreciate you having me on your show, because here's what we know right now in the acute phase, but the long-term effects of this vape use, they're coming. It's coming.
Well, when we when the studies were coming out about cigarettes and they basically lied under oath in Congress. The heads of they were like the heads of the five family, like the mafia. They all basically lied and they said, no, I do not believe that cigarettes are addictive. And they basically lied, right? And they put pressure on people that were doing the studies. Are you seeing any pressure now from any industry hitting back against people that are doing studies like this, or are they kind of
Well, I get
accepting it?
slammed really bad on social media when I show anything that shows health effects of vape use.
Okay.
And to be honest, it's often those who run vape retailers
Right.
saying vapes are not near as bad, and granted, there's less harmful chemicals for sure in e-cigarettes compared to combustible cigarettes, but research is clear that there's at least equivalent nicotine in vapes. Research is clear it's bad for the lungs. Research is clear it's bad for the heart. And this nicotine addiction is carrying on very early in life and can translate into a trajectory of poor health outcomes in adulthood.
You say what's going on in the lungs. Is it literally like, I mean, I hear people, I don't know if they're just exaggerating or not, and they're saying it's like oil basically just coating your lungs. Is it really as bad as people are making it sound? The like what is actually happening?
Yeah, so well, obviously, Dean, I'm not a physician, but we were applying for a grant, and I can tell you that some people at London Health Sciences Centre here in London that are lung health experts said it's at least, this is according to them, so it's take it for what it's worth, at least as bad as what we're seeing in cigarettes among these youth with the popcorn lung. And one of the things they were considering doing, it might be a challenge through research ethics boards, was in addition to using, say, a smartphone to send messages to teens saying, "Did you know that vape use," I'm just making this up, "is associated with nicotine toxicity, it's associated with acute pulmonary injury." That would be one phase of the intervention. The other phase might be another group also get their lung images. And even though that might be challenging ethically because they don't want to see those lung images, would that have a much greater effect on these teens to go, "Oh, I'm far more likely to quit e-cigarette use if I see my lung images." Now, again, I want to say this isn't people that vape, once a month or once every 6 weeks when they go out with their friends. These are especially those who are really addicted to vaping and cannabis use, or use their vape products to consume cannabis every single day. And I hate to say this, but often morning to night when they go to school, they're often, high, etc. That.
Is there difference between males and females?
Great question. Yeah, research shows consistently that vaping is more common among males than females, but the relationship isn't as strong as one would suspect. So in my research, I have it here, males were about 39% which is still considerable, more likely to vape in the past 30 days than females, but not like double the odds or triple the odds. So that relationship is not, it's not like females are not addicted also.
Right. Wow. There's a lot there. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm really concerned for the kids that I see because you're talking about young adults under the age of 25. This is the most stubborn age group, this most stubborn demographic. You can't get them. I mean, tell them not to drink. Tell them not to drive like a madman. Tell them not to go and bet on pro line.
Right.
Tell them not to go have unprotected sex. This is what they do. This is what our generation did when our parents basically told us what not to do, and their parents did the same thing. And that is the hard thing. So I hate being one of those people who wants to bring the government in because the government basically is so bad at everything. But I mean, I don't have any ideas. Do you have anything else? Anything thinking outside the box other than telling people, look, this is bad and you have to take responsibility for your life?
I say a couple things. One is, Dean, you hit the needle right on the head. Adolescence, basically 10 to 19-ish, risky behavior tends to go up. It tends to go up more when youth separate a little bit from the parents and go off to college and go off to university. So this is my honest best way of saying this is I'm a strong believer, as you know, in physical activity. I think it can be underestimated how important it is, not just because exercise is good for you and the guidelines say 60 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous activity, but I think when you have something that you're passionate about and that you get better at, I think doesn't mean that substance use won't still be there, but I think if you get something that you really, really love, so for me, as you know, it's martial arts. Um, if you get something you really, really love, it's linked to that centenarian live to 100. You get the physical activity, which is good for your physical health. It's good for your mental health. You get the connectedness, right? That whether it's especially if it's a team sport, but I'd even argue in an individualistic activity like martial arts, you're still there sweating and working out by people trying to perform you. So you get that, and when you're exercising a lot, you want to eat a little bit better. You don't want a Big Mac and fries before a game or before a brown belt testing. So I'm still a strong advocate. I know it sounds simplistic of a lot of physical activity and getting involved because you're right, Dean. When we talk about when you and I were young, well, we weren't like this all day long.
Yeah.
And this is what they do all day long. They're on their phones. And I don't want to point fingers at them because that's all they've been used to. We didn't have that issue.
Yeah, and one thing that I want to delve into later on with some other doctors is it are they doing this and eating poorly because what people say, oh, kids these days they're lazy. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's their diet that's making them do this because they don't have the energy to go out and do anything and they'd rather just sit down on a couch.
So that
So
chicken or the
what's
egg,
exactly what's causing what?
right?
And the other thing too I totally agree with you about physical exercise. Another component to that is competitive athletes. If they think, you know what, I can play on that team next year, or I can get a scholarship in the States for soccer, for baseball, for something, they tend to eat better. They stay away from drugs and they stay away from alcohol and they stay away from other behaviors as well. Like their incidence of teenage pregnancy is lower if you're on a competitive team, right? And what we found were when players dropped out of the competitive system, they went to those bad behaviors. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Totally agree. And in my life, outside of academia, of course, it's martial arts, but I can think of two people, Dean, that got their black belt with me. They're both they're young for it. 19 is young for my school, but they're black belt second degree. They're both 19. They've been with me for, I don't know, 12, 13 years. And I can tell you 100% they're not addicted to drugs because they basically live in my garage, which is my home dojo, and those workouts they're intense, but they have meaning, they have passion. Not to say they don't eat bad. Sometimes, of course, they're 19, and it doesn't mean they don't ever have a drink of alcohol. Of course they do. They're 19, but you're right, that addiction to substance use declines dramatically if they're physically active and their mental health is better and they have more confidence about themselves.
Absolutely. There's so many benefits. So many benefits. Yeah, I mean, listen, you've sparred with the Gracies, right? The world famous Gracies. You're not going to go there and like have a cig and like do some vaping. Is like, all right, Hoist, let's go. Who's getting on the mat?
Not sparred, but
Not
I've
sparred. You've
techniques with them.
tried.
Yeah,
Yeah, you've mixed. Yeah.
it didn't go
Um,
well for me.
well, he tapped you. He
Yeah.
tapped you out. Listen, thank you so much for this. I'd love to do this again some other time and actually deal with nutrition next time.
That'd be
Um,
amazing.
we can do that, but I really, really appreciate that. I know you got a lot of interviews on television and stuff like that, so I appreciate your time. My students do as well. I'll put pause here so I can say a nice goodbye to you. I don't know, although I don't know where it is. Where is it? More. There it is. Pause. All right, so I'll say goodbye to you officially. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamie Seabrook.